Deep in a forgotten mountain valley, where the roads disappeared beneath snow and the outside world rarely remembered its name, there lived a woman everyone believed they already understood. They saw her walking slowly through the dusty streets of Hollow Creek. They saw her worn boots, her plain dresses, and the way she kept her eyes lowered whenever strangers stared too long. They saw her larger frame and decided they knew everything about her before she ever spoke a single word. To them, Elowen Voss was just the oversized ranch woman who lived at the edge of the valley, the woman who was too quiet, too soft, too different, the woman who, according to the people sitting around the town cafe, had no chance of surviving when the powerful men from the city came to take her family land. "She can barely carry herself across that ranch," one man whispered over his coffee, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "How does she think she's going to fight men with money and lawyers?" A few people laughed, not because the joke was funny, but because laughing together made them feel less guilty. Elowen heard every word. She always did. She had learned something years ago about people who looked down on others. They rarely lowered their voices because they believed the person they were hurting was too powerless to respond. But they were wrong. They had mistaken silence for weakness. And they were about to learn the difference. Because beneath the simple dresses and tired eyes was a woman who had spent her entire life surviving things nobody else knew about. She had survived losing her mother when she was young. She had survived watching her father work himself into exhaustion trying to protect their ranch. She had survived years of whispers, cruel jokes, and strangers who believed her body told the story of who she was. But the one thing she would never allow was watching someone steal the only thing her family had left: their home, their land, their legacy. The Voss Ranch had stood in the mountain valley for almost 80 years. Generations of her family had worked that land, raising cattle, growing crops, and building a life from nothing but stubborn determination and endless days of hard work. But now, a powerful land syndicate from the eastern cities wanted it. They claimed the property belonged to them. They had documents. They had lawyers. They had men willing to threaten anyone who questioned them. And most importantly, they had a secret connected to the disappearance of Elowen's father years earlier. For a long time, Elowen believed her father's final days were simply a tragedy, an accident. A man who went searching for answers and never returned. But after finding an old locked box hidden beneath the floorboards of the ranch house, she discovered something that changed everything. Her father had not disappeared by accident. He had been investigating something dangerous. Inside that box were old letters, land records, names of powerful men, and a message written in his own handwriting. A message meant only for her. "If you are reading this, they finally came for the ranch." Elowen had read those words again and again. Her hands had trembled. Her heart had felt like it was breaking. Because for the first time, she understood that her father had not abandoned her. He had been fighting. And now, the fight belonged to her. The autumn wind moved across Hollow Creek that morning, carrying the smell of pine trees and cold mountain air. The valley looked peaceful from a distance. Golden fields stretched beneath the mountains. The river moved quietly through the trees. But Elowen knew better. Some places looked beautiful because they were hiding what happened beneath the surface. She stood outside the ranch house, holding the old letter in her hand, staring toward the mountains where her father used to take her riding when she was a child. "Dad," she whispered softly, "what did you find?" The wind answered with silence, and somehow that silence felt heavier than any storm. For years, Elowen had tried to keep the ranch alive alone. She repaired fences, she cared for the cattle, she fixed broken equipment. She woke before sunrise and worked until her hands ached. People assumed because she was quiet, she was helpless. They never saw the woman who stayed awake all night during winter storms because a newborn calf needed help. They never saw the woman who carried heavy feed bags when nobody else was around. They never saw the woman who buried her own pain because there was always another problem waiting. They only saw what they wanted to see. And now the people coming for her ranch were making the same mistake. They thought they were facing someone easy to defeat. They had no idea they had awakened someone who had spent her entire life learning how to endure. 3 days later, a black carriage appeared on the road leading into the valley. It moved slowly through the dust, expensive and completely out of place among the old wooden buildings and simple ranch homes. Everyone in Hollow Creek knew what it meant. The city had arrived. The door opened, and a tall man stepped out wearing a perfectly fitted coat and polished boots that had never touched honest ranch work. His name was Victor Marlowe, the head of the Marlowe Land Company. A man who had purchased half the valley through promises, pressure, and carefully hidden threats. He looked around Hollow Creek with the calm confidence of someone who believed everything already belonged to him. Then his eyes moved toward the Voss Ranch. A small smile appeared on his face. "Soon," he said quietly. His assistant standing beside him followed his gaze. "You think she'll give up?" Victor laughed softly. "Elowen Voss?" He shook his head. "No, that woman has her father's stubbornness." The assistant looked surprised. "You say that like it's a compliment." Victor's smile disappeared. "It isn't." He watched the ranch in the distance. Stubborn people are dangerous when they still believe they have something worth saving. That afternoon, Elowen received the official notice. The paper was delivered by a young man who refused to meet her eyes. She stood on the porch, holding the document while the ranch animals moved quietly behind her. The words were simple, the meaning was not. The Marlowe Land Company was claiming ownership of the property. They gave her 30 days to leave. 30 days to abandon the only home she had ever known. Elowen read the letter twice, then a third time. Not because she did not understand, because she could not believe someone could write something so cold and call it legal. When the messenger turned to leave, she stopped him. "Who signed this?" The young man hesitated. "Mr. Marlowe's office." "I didn't ask who delivered it." Her voice remained calm. "I asked who signed it." The messenger swallowed. "Victor Marlowe." Elowen folded the paper carefully. "Tell him something." The young man looked back. "What?" She stared toward the mountains. "Tell him the Voss Ranch has survived worse storms than him." For the first time, the messenger looked at her differently. Not with pity, not with judgment, with uncertainty. Because something about the way she said those words made him wonder if everyone had misunderstood Elowen Voss. That night, Elowen opened the old wooden box again, the one her father had hidden. She spread the documents across the kitchen table. For hours she studied every page, every name, every signature, every clue, and slowly, a pattern began to appear. Her father had discovered that several ranch families in the valley had lost their land under suspicious circumstances. Families who disappeared. Families who left suddenly. Families who were told they had no choice. The same names appeared again and again. Marlowe, a local judge, a former land inspector, and one name that made Elowen stop breathing for a moment. Corvin Hale. She stared at the name. She knew that name. Everyone in the valley did. Corvin Hale was the mountain cowboy who lived alone beyond the northern ridge, a man people described as cold, dangerous, and impossible to understand. Some said he had once been one of the best riders in the territory. Others said he had lost everything and walked away from society. Nobody really knew the truth, but his name was written in her father's records, and that meant only one thing. He knew something. The next morning, Elowen saddled her horse and headed toward the northern mountains. The same people who had laughed at her watched from their windows. They expected her to fail. They expected her to return embarrassed, but Elowen kept riding, because for the first time in years, she was not fighting to prove herself to them. She was fighting because the truth was waiting, and she was ready to find it, even if the truth led her straight to the one man in the valley everyone feared. Corvin Hale. The trail toward the northern ridge was one most people in Hollow Creek avoided, not because the path was impossible, not because the mountains were impossible to climb, but because of the man who lived at the end of it. Corvin Hale. The name alone was enough to make conversations become quieter. Some people said he was a man who had forgotten how to smile. Others claimed he had once been someone important before a tragedy changed him. A few of the older ranchers said he was the kind of person who could sit beside a campfire for hours without speaking a single word. Nobody truly knew Corvin Hale, and those who did know him rarely talked about him. Elowen had heard the stories her entire life. She remembered being a little girl and listening to the adults in town speak about the mysterious cowboy who disappeared into the mountains. "Stay away from that ridge," they would tell her. "There's nothing up there except trouble." Back then, Elowen had believed them. Now, years later, she understood something. People often called something dangerous when they simply did not understand it. The same thing had happened to her. For most of her life, people had looked at her and decided she was weak. They saw her body before they saw her heart. They saw her quiet nature before they saw her courage. They saw what made her different and ignored everything that made her strong. Maybe that was why she was not afraid to meet Corvin Hale, because she knew what it felt like to be judged by people who never bothered to learn the truth. The mountain path became steeper as she climbed higher. The trees grew thicker. The air became colder. The sounds of Hollow Creek slowly disappeared behind her, until all she could hear was the wind moving through the pine branches and the steady rhythm of her horse's footsteps. Elowen pulled her coat tighter around herself. She had spent years working on the ranch, but these mountains felt different. They felt like they were keeping secrets. After several hours of riding, she finally saw smoke rising between the trees. A small cabin stood near the edge of a rocky overlook. It was simple, strong, built by someone who expected to survive alone. Elowen stopped her horse several yards away. She looked at the cabin. Then she looked down at the old documents tucked safely inside her coat. For a moment, doubt entered her mind. Not fear, something different. The feeling of stepping into a stranger's life and asking them to reopen wounds they had buried. But she had no other choice. She climbed down from the horse and walked toward the cabin. Before she reached the door, a voice came from behind her. "You're either very brave or very foolish." Elowen froze. Slowly, she turned. A man stood near the tree line, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket covered with dust from the mountain trails. His hand rested near the knife at his belt, but his expression was calm. His eyes were the first thing she noticed. Cold, careful. Like someone who had spent years watching the world betray him. Corvin Hale. Elowen had expected someone intimidating. She had not expected someone who looked tired. Not physically, emotionally. "I could say the same about a man who hides in the mountains and watches strangers walk onto his property," she replied. For a brief second, something changed in his expression. Almost surprise. Most people probably became nervous around him. Elowen did not. Corvin looked at her horse, then at the long journey she had made. "You came from Hollow Creek?" "Yes." "Why?" Elowen reached into her coat and pulled out the papers. "I need answers." Corvin did not move. "About what?" "My father." The moment she said those words, the air seemed to change. Corvin's face became harder. "What about him?" "You knew him." Silence. A long silence. The kind that told Elowen she had found the right person. Finally, Corvin looked away. "You should leave." "That is not an answer. It is advice. I didn't ride all the way up here for advice." Corvin studied her carefully. "You don't understand what you're looking into. Then explain it. You think this is about your ranch." "It is." "No." His voice was quiet. "But certain, this is bigger than your ranch." The wind moved between them. Elowen held his gaze. "My father disappeared because of whatever he found." Corvin's jaw tightened. "You need to stop asking questions." "Why?" "Because sometimes questions bring answers you cannot survive." The words should have scared her. Maybe they would have years ago. But Elowen had already lost too much to walk away now. She stepped closer. "My whole life people have told me what I can't do." Corvin said nothing. "They told me I was too weak to run a ranch." She looked down at the papers. "They told me I should accept losing everything, because fighting back was pointless." Her eyes lifted. "I believed them for a long time." Something in her voice changed. Not anger, not bitterness, determination. But I am done believing people who have never cared enough to know me. Corvin watched her. For the first time, he did not see the woman everyone in town talked about. He saw someone standing in front of him who had climbed a mountain alone because she needed the truth. That was not weakness. That was something else. Something rare. "You remind me of your father," he finally said. Elowen's expression softened slightly. What was he like? Corvin looked toward the mountains. For a moment, the coldness disappeared. He was stubborn. A small smile almost appeared. Annoyingly stubborn. Elowen smiled faintly. That sounds like him. He believed people were better than they acted. Corvin's expression darkened. He was wrong about some people. What happened? The question hung between them. Corvin walked toward the cabin. After a moment, he opened the door. "Come inside." Elowen followed. The cabin was warmer than she expected. A small fire burned in the stone fireplace. Shelves lined the walls with books, tools, and old supplies. It was not the home of a dangerous man. It was the home of someone who had learned to live without depending on anyone. Corvin placed a kettle over the fire. Elowen noticed something immediately. The cabin was organized. Everything had a place. Everything was maintained. This was not a man who had given up. This was a man who had built a life around surviving. "You knew my father well?" she asked. Corvin remained quiet for several moments. Then he reached toward a wooden box sitting near the fireplace. He opened it. Inside were old papers, very similar to hers. Elowen's heart began beating faster. "You have copies." Corvin nodded. "Your father gave these to me before he disappeared." The room suddenly felt smaller. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Corvin looked at her. Who would have listened? The question hurt because she already knew the answer. Nobody. The people in Hollow Creek had already decided what happened. They had accepted the easiest explanation. A man disappeared. A woman inherited a struggling ranch. Life moved on. But Corvin knew something else. "I tried to expose them," he said quietly. "Who?" "The people behind the land deals." Elowen moved closer. "Victor Marlowe?" Corvin's eyes sharpened. "You know his name. He sent papers trying to take my ranch." Corvin looked toward the window. He finally made his move. "What does that mean?" "It means your father was right." Elowen felt a chill. "About what?" Corvin turned back toward her. "That Marlowe was not buying land." He paused. "He was erasing people." The fire cracked softly. Outside, the mountains remained silent. But inside that small cabin, Elowen felt the truth beginning to reveal itself. Her father had not simply discovered corruption. He had discovered a plan that had been happening for years, and now she was standing in the middle of it. "What happened to my father?" she whispered. Corvin looked down. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then finally he answered. "Your father found proof that Marlowe's company was using fake ownership records to steal ranches." Elowen felt her hands tighten. He was going to expose them. Yes. What stopped him? Corvin's eyes became filled with regret. He trusted the wrong person. The words felt heavy. "Who?" Corvin looked at the old papers, then back at her. "Someone close to your family." Elowen felt her stomach drop. "Who?" Before Corvin could answer, a sound came from outside. A branch breaking. Both of them went silent. Corvin immediately reached for the rifle leaning against the wall. His entire posture changed. The tired man disappeared. The survivor returned. Elowen noticed the difference. This was a man who had lived through danger. A man who knew when trouble was near. Corvin moved toward the window and looked outside. "What is it?" He did not answer immediately. Then his voice became low. "We have company." Elowen stepped closer. Through the glass, she saw movement between the trees. 3 riders, slowly approaching, and they were not lost travelers, because the man riding in front carried a symbol on his coat. The same symbol stamped on the papers trying to steal her ranch. Marlowe Land Company. Corvin lowered the curtain. "They followed you." Elowen's heart raced. "How?" Corvin looked at her. "Because whoever wants your ranch knows something." "What?" His expression became serious. "They know you found your father's secrets." The fire continued burning. The riders moved closer. And for the first time since leaving Hollow Creek, Elowen realized something. The fight for her ranch had already begun, and now the people who wanted her silent knew exactly where to find her. The riders stopped just beyond the tree line. They did not rush. They did not shout. They simply waited. And somehow, that made the situation feel worse. Elowen stood beside Corvin, watching the dark shapes of the horses moving slightly in the cold evening air. The men outside knew exactly where they were. They knew exactly who was inside. This was not a search. This was a warning. "Who are they?" Elowen whispered. Corvin kept his eyes on the window. "Men who believe fear is stronger than the truth." "That doesn't answer my question." "No." His hand tightened around the rifle. "It doesn't." The silence between them was broken by a voice outside. "Corvin Hale." The man calling out sounded confident. Too confident. The kind of confidence that came from believing consequences only happened to other people. Corvin's expression changed slightly. "You know him?" "Yes." "Who is he?" Corvin looked toward the door. "Caleb Rourke." The name meant nothing to Elowen, but the reaction on Corvin's face told her enough. "He works for Marlowe. He works for whoever pays him." Another voice called from outside. "Corvin, we know the woman is with you. This doesn't have to become difficult." Elowen looked at Corvin. "Does that line usually work?" A small, unexpected movement crossed his face, almost a smile. "Probably." "Do people usually believe it?" "No." "Then why say it?" Corvin looked at her. "Because men like that hope everyone else is more afraid than they are." Elowen looked back toward the window. The strange thing was, she was afraid. Anyone would be. 3 armed men outside, a hidden conspiracy, a father's disappearance, a ranch being stolen. It was enough to make anyone want to run. But fear was not the same thing as surrender. Elowen had spent years living with fear. Fear of judgment, fear of losing everything, fear of waking up one morning and realizing the world had taken another piece of her life. She knew fear. And she knew she was tired of letting it make decisions for her. "What do they want?" she asked. Corvin lowered his voice. "The documents. My father's records, yes." "Why?" "Because they prove what they did." Elowen looked down at the papers. The old pages suddenly felt heavier in her hands. Years of secrets, years of lies. A truth powerful enough that people were willing to chase her into the mountains for it. Corvin moved toward the back of the cabin. "There is another way out." Elowen turned. "What?" "An old trail behind the ridge. You want us to leave. I want you to survive." She stared at him. "And what about you?" Corvin did not answer. That was answer enough. Elowen understood immediately. He planned to stay. "You're going to distract them. It's my cabin." "That's not what I asked." Corvin looked away. For the first time, she saw something beneath his calm exterior. Not fear, not anger, guilt. "You've been fighting them alone for years," Elowen said quietly. Corvin said nothing. "You knew this day would come." Still nothing. "You thought eventually they would come for you." His jaw tightened. "And you decided you would face them alone." The silence confirmed it. Elowen shook her head. "That sounds familiar." Corvin looked at her. "What?" She held his gaze. "You and me." The words caught him off guard. "You built a cabin in the mountains because people hurt you." She glanced toward the door. "I stayed quiet because people hurt me." A pause. "Different reasons." Another pause. "But the same result." Corvin looked at her for a long moment. Then he quietly said, "You should have left when you had the chance." Elowen's expression softened. "Maybe." She stepped closer. "But I didn't." Before Corvin could respond, the men outside moved. The sound of boots hitting the frozen ground grew louder. Caleb Rourke called again. "Last chance, Hale." Corvin raised the rifle. Elowen noticed something. His hands were steady, but his eyes were not. Not because he was afraid, because he knew exactly what was coming. The first shot hit the outside wall. The sound exploded through the cabin. Wood splintered. Elowen flinched. Corvin immediately moved in front of her. "Stay down." Another shot. Then another. The cabin shook with the impact. Elowen dropped behind the table, while Corvin returned fire through the window. The sound of gunfire echoed through the mountains. For several minutes, everything became noise. The sharp crack of rifles, the shouting outside, the wind rushing through the trees. Elowen watched Corvin move through the cabin with complete focus. He was not reckless. He was not angry. He was controlled. Every movement had purpose. She understood then why people feared him, not because he was cruel, because he was capable. The men outside had expected a lonely cowboy hiding in the mountains. They had not expected someone who had spent years preparing for the day the past came looking for him. But then something changed. The shooting stopped. Elowen looked up. Did they leave? Corvin did not lower his rifle. No. How do you know? Because people like Caleb don't leave when they fail. A moment later, a voice came from behind the cabin. Not outside the front door. Behind them. Corvin's eyes narrowed. Cellar. What? They found the back entrance. The two of them moved quickly. The cabin had a small storage cellar beneath the floor. Corvin opened the wooden door. Cold air rushed upward. Elowen looked down into the darkness. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Someone was climbing inside. Corvin grabbed her arm. Listen to me. His voice was quiet, serious. If anything happens, you take the documents and run. No. Elowen. No. His eyes narrowed. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You don't know these men. And you don't know me. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then the cellar door moved. Someone was pushing from below. Corvin looked at Elowen. Why are you so stubborn? She almost laughed, despite everything. Everyone keeps asking me that. The door cracked open. Corvin lifted his rifle. But before he could fire, Elowen grabbed the heavy iron fireplace tool beside her. Corvin looked at her. You're bringing that? She looked down at the tool, then back at him. I'm not exactly known for carrying a tiny handbag. For the first time, something almost like amusement appeared in Corvin's eyes. It disappeared quickly, but she saw it. The door burst open. A man climbed upward. Not Caleb. Another hired gun. He looked surprised when he saw Elowen standing there. Maybe he expected her to scream. Maybe he expected her to run. Instead, she swung the iron tool into the wooden edge beside him. The sudden movement startled him enough for Corvin to grab him and pull him away from the opening. The man fell hard. Corvin disarmed him within seconds. But Elowen noticed something. The man was young, younger than she expected. His face showed fear more than cruelty. You don't have to do this, she said. The man looked at her. You think I have a choice? Those words stayed with her. Because they sounded familiar. She had spent years feeling trapped too. Not by a gun, by expectations, by cruelty, by a world that decided her value before knowing her. Corvin tied the man's hands. What did Marlowe promise you? He asked. The man looked away. Money. Is that worth dying for? The man said nothing. Corvin searched him and found a small envelope inside his coat. He opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper. Elowen watched his expression change. What is it? Corvin handed it to her. She read the words, and her heart stopped, because the handwriting was familiar. It was her father's, but the letter was not old. It was recent, very recent. The message was only one sentence. Trust no one in Hollow Creek. Elowen looked at Corvin. What does this mean? Corvin stared at the paper. I don't know. That's impossible. No. His voice became quieter. It means your father may not have disappeared when we thought he did. The room went completely silent. Elowen felt the ground beneath her change. Her father, the man she had mourned, the man she believed was gone. Could he still be alive? Or was someone using his words to manipulate them? Outside, the mountains remained dark and endless. But somewhere beyond those peaks, a new truth was waiting, and it was far more dangerous than either of them expected. Because if Elowen's father was alive, then someone had spent years making sure everyone believed he was dead. And now that Elowen had found the evidence, someone was terrified she would uncover why. The letter shook slightly in Elowen's hand, not because of the cold, not because of the danger waiting outside, but because of the impossible thought forming in her mind. Her father might have been alive. For years, she had forced herself to accept his disappearance. She had learned how to wake up every morning without hearing his footsteps outside the house. She had learned how to sit at the dinner table alone. She had learned how to look at his old coat hanging near the door and tell herself that memories were all she had left. Grief was painful. But uncertainty was something else. Uncertainty had teeth. It could keep a person awake for years, always wondering, what if? What if he had survived? What if he had needed help? What if someone had known the truth and chose to stay silent? Elowen looked at the paper again. The handwriting was unmistakable. The same sharp letters, the same way her father crossed his T's, the same way he always pressed harder at the end of a sentence when he wanted his words remembered. This was not a copy. This was not a story someone had created. Her father had written this. But why? Why now? Why had someone hidden it? And why had it been found on a man working for Victor Marlowe? "Who gave you this?" Corvin asked the captured man. The man remained silent. Corvin crouched down. "I'm not asking because I want revenge." The man looked at him. "I'm asking because if Marlowe sent you here, then you are already disposable to him." The man's expression changed slightly, just for a second, but Elowen noticed. Fear, real fear, not fear of Corvin, fear of Victor Marlowe. "He doesn't care about us," the man finally whispered. Corvin's eyes narrowed. "Then tell us what you know." The man looked toward the floor. "He said the woman would find the papers eventually." Elowen felt a chill. "What woman?" The man looked at her. "You." The room became silent. "He knew I would find them." The man swallowed. "He said your father was stubborn. Said you would be too." Elowen felt anger rise inside her. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that made someone lose control. A quiet anger. The kind that comes after years of being underestimated. "They knew I would fight." The man said nothing. "They knew I wouldn't leave." Still nothing. Corvin stood slowly. "That means this was never about removing you from the ranch." Elowen looked at him. "What do you mean? They could have taken your land years ago." His voice became serious. "They had opportunities." He looked at the letter. "They waited." "Why?" Corvin stared into the fire. "Because they were looking for something." Elowen's eyes moved to the old documents. "My father's evidence." "Yes." She looked toward the mountains. "So, all these years." She stopped. The thought was too painful to finish. Corvin understood anyway. "All these years, they thought your father hid something before he disappeared." Elowen slowly sat down. The weight of everything finally reached her. She had spent years believing she was fighting for a piece of land, a house, a ranch, a memory. But now she realized she was fighting for the truth about a man she had never stopped missing. Corvin watched her quietly. He wanted to say something, but he was not a man who knew how to comfort people. He knew how to survive storms. He knew how to fight. He knew how to track someone through the wilderness. But sitting beside someone who was hurting, that was a battle he had never learned. Finally, he poured a cup of water and placed it beside her. Elowen looked at it, then at him. "Thank you." Corvin nodded once. It was a small gesture, but for a man like him, it meant something. The next morning, they buried the evidence they could not carry. Not because they wanted to hide it, because they needed to protect it. Corvin had a hidden compartment beneath one of the floorboards where he kept important documents. Elowen watched him place her father's letter inside. "You've been preparing for this." Corvin paused. "For what?" "For the day someone came looking." He did not answer. That was becoming his habit. Elowen crossed her arms. "You do that often." "What?" "Stay silent when the answer hurts." Corvin looked at her. "You noticed too much." "I had to." His expression softened slightly. "When people spend years pretending you are invisible, you learn to watch carefully." The words stayed with him, because he understood, more than he wanted to admit. After sunrise, they left the cabin. The captured man was tied safely and left with supplies near the trail leading back to town. Corvin knew someone would find him. Elowen was surprised. You're letting him go. He's not the person we need. He tried to break into your home. Yes, Corvin looked back toward the trail. But he's a man who made one bad choice, because someone powerful convinced him he had no other options. Elowen studied him. For someone everyone called cold, Corvin had more compassion than many people she had known. They rode down the mountain together. For the first time, they were not strangers. Not exactly. There was still distance between them, still unanswered questions, still pain they had not spoken about. But something had changed. A quiet trust had begun, the kind that does not appear overnight, the kind built through shared danger, through small moments, through seeing someone's true nature when there is no reason to pretend. By late afternoon, they reached an old abandoned church outside Hollow Creek. Corvin stopped his horse. "We wait here." Elowen looked at the broken building. "Why?" "Because someone in town knows more than they're saying." "Who?" Corvin looked toward the valley. "The person who helped your father." Elowen climbed down. "Who?" Corvin hesitated. Then he said the name. "Margaret Vale." Elowen frowned. The name sounded familiar. "From the general store." Corvin nodded. "She knew your father better than most people." Elowen looked confused. "She never told me." She was afraid. Of Marlowe? Corvin looked away. Of what she knew. The two entered the old church. Dust covered the wooden benches. The windows were cracked. The place felt forgotten. But hidden beneath one of the floorboards was a small metal container. Corvin pulled it out. Elowen stared. How many secrets are hidden under floors in this valley? Probably more than anyone wants to admit. Inside the container were photographs, old newspaper clippings, and a journal. Elowen recognized the handwriting immediately. Her father's. She opened the journal carefully. The first pages were ordinary. Notes about cattle, weather, ranch repairs. Then the entries changed. The writing became rushed, more desperate. October 12th, Elowen read quietly. "I found proof that the land purchases are connected. Families were forced out. Records were changed. Payments were made to officials." She turned the page. "Someone inside the valley is helping them." Her heart tightened. She continued. "I cannot trust the sheriff. I cannot trust the judge. I cannot trust anyone who benefits from silence." Another page, then another, until she reached the final entry. The last words her father ever wrote. "Tomorrow I will meet the person who can expose everything." Elowen stopped. There was more. A name, written below. A name she had never expected. Her hands went cold. Corvin noticed. "What?" She slowly turned the journal toward him. The name stared back at both of them. Not Victor Marlowe, not the sheriff, not the judge. Someone closer. Someone who had been part of her life. Someone she trusted. Corvin's face became pale. "No." Elowen looked at him. "You know this person." He did not answer. "Corvin." His silence frightened her more than any answer could have. Finally he whispered, "Yes." "Who are they?" Corvin looked at the name again, then at Elowen, and the sadness in his eyes told her the truth before he ever spoke. "It's someone who has been protecting you." Elowen felt confused. "Protecting me?" Corvin nodded slowly. "But also someone who helped hide the truth." The wind moved through the broken windows of the church. Outside, the valley looked peaceful, almost innocent. But Elowen knew better now. The greatest dangers were never the ones that announced themselves. They were the ones standing beside you, smiling, waiting, and pretending they were on your side. Because the name written in her father's journal belonged to the last person Elowen ever expected to betray her, and discovering why would force her to question everything she thought she knew about her family, her home, and the people of Hollow Creek. Elowen stared at the name written across the old journal page. For several seconds, she could not move. The letters seemed impossible, like her mind refused to accept what her eyes were seeing. The person her father had written about, the person connected to the biggest secret in Hollow Creek, the person who knew more than anyone else, was someone Elowen had known her entire life, someone she had trusted, someone who had sat at her family's dinner table, someone who had held her hand when she was a child, and told her that everything would be okay. Margaret Vale, the woman who owned the general store, the woman everyone in town considered harmless, the woman who had watched Elowen grow up. "No," Elowen whispered. Corvin remained silent. That silence hurt more than an argument would have, because she could see it in his eyes. He knew. "You knew her," Elowen said. Corvin looked away. "Yes." "How long?" "A long time." Her voice became quieter. "How long did you know she was involved?" Corvin looked back at her. "She wasn't involved the way you think." Elowen's expression hardened. "She is in my father's journal." "Yes." "Her name is written next to the words, 'Cannot trust.'" "Yes." "Then explain." Corvin took a slow breath. "She was not helping Marlowe." "Then why was her name there?" "Because your father was afraid." "Afraid of her?" "No." Corvin looked down. "He was afraid of what would happen to her." The answer confused her. "What does that mean?" Corvin walked toward the broken church window and stared toward Hollow Creek. "Your father knew someone had betrayed him. He knew someone inside the valley was feeding information to Marlowe. Then why write Margaret's name?" "Because Margaret was the only person who knew who the traitor was." Elowen felt the confusion deepen. "So she knew?" "Yes. And she never told me." Corvin did not answer. She laughed quietly. Not because anything was funny, because sometimes disappointment came out sounding like laughter. Everyone knew something. Her voice shook. "My father knew. You knew. Margaret knew." She looked around the old church. "And I was the only person who didn't." Corvin stepped closer. "Elowen." "No." She held up a hand. For once, she did not want someone to comfort her. She had spent years being protected by silence, and silence had cost her everything. "I spent my whole life thinking people ignored me because they thought I was weak." She looked at the journal. "But maybe they ignored me because they thought I couldn't handle the truth." Corvin watched her carefully, and maybe they were wrong. The words were quiet, but certain. Elowen closed the journal. "Take me to Margaret." Corvin frowned. "Now?" "Yes. It's getting dark." "I don't care." "Elowen." "No." She looked at him. "I have spent years waiting for answers." Her eyes moved toward the valley. "I'm done waiting." Corvin studied her. There it was again. The thing people misunderstood about her. They thought strength was loud. They thought strong people were fearless. But Elowen knew better. Strength was being afraid and moving forward anyway. After a moment, Corvin nodded. "Then we go together." The ride back to Hollow Creek was quiet. The kind of quiet that carried too many thoughts. Elowen watched the mountains pass around her. She thought about her father. She thought about the years she spent believing she had been left behind. And she thought about all the people who had chosen silence. The town lights appeared in the distance. Small, warm, almost peaceful. But Elowen no longer trusted appearances. They reached Margaret Vale's store after sunset. The building was still lit from inside. Corvin tied the horses outside. Elowen stepped toward the door. Before she could knock, it opened. Margaret stood there, an older woman with silver hair, tired eyes, and the same gentle expression Elowen remembered from childhood. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, Margaret looked afraid. "Elowen." The way she said her name told Elowen everything. Margaret had been expecting this day. "You knew I would come." Margaret slowly stepped back. "Come inside." Elowen entered. The store looked exactly the same as always. Shelves filled with supplies, wooden counters, the smell of coffee and old paper. A place that had always felt safe. Now it felt like a room full of hidden memories. Corvin stayed near the door. Margaret noticed him. "You brought him." Elowen looked between them. "You two have been talking." Margaret sighed. "Yes." "How long?" "Since before your father disappeared." Elowen felt her chest tighten. "Then tell me everything." Margaret looked down. "I wanted to." "But you didn't." "No." "Why?" Margaret's eyes filled with sadness. "Because your father made me promise." Elowen froze. "My father?" "He knew if the truth came out too soon, they would come after you." "They came after me anyway." Margaret looked at the floor. "I know." The simple answer hurt. Because Margaret was not denying it. She was accepting it. I was trying to protect you. Elowen shook her head. Everyone says that. Her voice became emotional. Everyone says they were protecting me. She stepped closer. But nobody ever asked me what I wanted. Margaret looked at her. And for the first time, Elowen saw something she had never seen before. Guilt. Deep, painful guilt. You're right. The words surprised her. Margaret continued. I was wrong. The room became quiet. I thought keeping you away from the truth would keep you safe. She wiped her eyes. But I forgot something your father always understood. What? Margaret looked at her. You were never weak. The words landed harder than Elowen expected, because she had spent so many years hearing the opposite. Margaret walked behind the counter and pulled out a small wooden box. I kept this for you. Elowen stared at it. What is it? Something your father left behind. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a photograph. Elowen picked it up. It showed her father standing beside another man, a younger Corvin Hale, and another person, a man Elowen recognized immediately. Her breath caught. Because she knew him. Everyone in Hollow Creek knew him. Sheriff Thomas Voss, her uncle, her father's older brother, the man who had helped raise her after her father disappeared, the man who had always told her that some things were better left in the past, the man who had comforted her when she cried. Elowen slowly looked up. Why is my uncle in this picture? Margaret's face changed, and Elowen already knew. The answer was going to hurt. Because Thomas was the one who warned Marlowe. The room went completely still. No. Elowen, no. She stepped back. My uncle. Margaret nodded sadly. He was the person your father discovered was helping them. Elowen stared at the photograph. Her entire life rearranged itself in a single moment. The man who had hugged her, the man who had told her he loved her, the man who had said he wanted to protect the family, was the same man who helped destroy it. Why? The word came out broken. Why would he do that? Margaret looked away. Because Marlowe promised him something. What? The Voss Ranch. Elowen felt sick. Her own family, her own blood, had helped take everything from her. He wanted the land. Yes. For money. Margaret shook her head. No. Elowen looked confused. Then what? Margaret hesitated. He believed your father was wasting the land. The answer made no sense. He thought he deserved it more. The fire in the store crackled softly. Elowen looked toward the window. Outside, Hollow Creek continued living as if nothing had happened. People walking home, lights turning off, families eating dinner. A normal night. But Elowen's world had changed forever. My uncle betrayed my father. Yes, he helped make him disappear. Margaret looked down. We don't know exactly what happened. That sentence caught Elowen's attention. What does that mean? Margaret became quiet. Then she reached into the box again. This time, she pulled out a small metal key. He may not have disappeared. Elowen stared. What? Margaret placed the key on the counter. Your father left one final message. Her voice dropped. He said if anything happened to him, the truth would be hidden where the mountains remember. Corvin stepped forward. The old mining tunnels. Margaret nodded. Elowen looked between them. What are you saying? Corvin's expression became serious. Your father may have hidden the final evidence there. And my uncle knows? Yes. Then why hasn't he destroyed it? Margaret looked toward the dark window. Because he has been searching for it for years. A cold feeling moved through Elowen. Suddenly, everything made sense. The land, the threats, the documents, the attacks. They were not trying to take her ranch. They were trying to find what her father hid, the proof that could destroy them. A loud sound interrupted the silence. The front window shattered. Everyone froze. A bullet struck the wooden wall. Margaret screamed. Corvin grabbed Elowen and pulled her down. Outside, horses moved quickly through the street. Someone shouted, "They know we're here!" Corvin looked toward the door. His expression changed. They're not trying to scare us anymore. Elowen gripped the old photograph. What are they doing? Corvin lifted his rifle. They're trying to erase the truth. And outside in the darkness of Hollow Creek, the men who had spent years hiding their secrets had finally realized one thing. Elowen Voss was no longer the quiet ranchwoman they could ignore. She had found the truth, and now she was coming for them. The road to the abandoned mining tunnels was almost invisible. Years of storms had washed away parts of the old trail. Trees had grown across sections of the path, and the wooden signs that once guided miners through the mountains had long fallen apart. It was the kind of place people forgot, and perhaps that was exactly why Elowen's father chose it. Forgotten places were where people hid things they wanted the world to never find. The morning air was cold enough to sting her face as she rode beside Corvin. Neither of them spoke much. There were too many things left unsaid, too many wounds opened in the last 24 hours. But there was also something different between them now. Before, Corvin had been a man protecting his secrets. Now, he was a man willing to share them. And Elowen understood that was not an easy thing for him. She looked ahead at the mountains. "Did you know my father before he bought the ranch?" Corvin glanced at her. "No. Then how did you meet?" Corvin was quiet for a moment. "After my wife died." Elowen looked at him. She had not expected that. Corvin continued riding. "She was sick for a long time. The doctors said there was nothing they could do." His voice remained steady, but his eyes changed. "I spent months pretending I was stronger than I was." Elowen listened silently. "When she passed, everyone told me I needed to move on." He gave a small, humorless smile. People always say that when they don't know what else to say. The words touched something inside Elowen, because she understood. People had told her to move on after her father disappeared. They had told her to accept it, to stop asking questions, to stop hoping. "But you didn't," she said. "No." "What did you do?" "I left." He looked toward the mountains. "I came here." Elowen nodded slowly. "So my father found you?" "Yes." "What did he see in you?" Corvin looked confused. "What?" "My father was not the kind of man who trusted easily." A small smile touched her face. "He must have seen something." Corvin thought about it. Then he answered quietly. He saw someone who was also tired of being alone. The words stayed between them, because maybe that was the thing that connected them from the beginning. Not their pain, not their losses, but the fact that both of them had spent years believing loneliness was safer than being hurt again. By midday, they reached the entrance to the old mining tunnels. The opening was hidden behind thick vines and fallen rocks. Corvin climbed down first. Elowen followed. The darkness swallowed them quickly. The only light came from the lanterns they carried. The tunnel smelled like wet stone and old earth. Every step echoed. Margaret stopped near the entrance. "I hate this place." Elowen looked back. "You have been here before." Margaret nodded. "Once." "When?" "After your father disappeared." Elowen turned. "What did you find?" Margaret looked down. "Nothing." Elowen studied her. "That wasn't the truth." Margaret sighed. "No." The tunnel became quiet. "What did you find?" Margaret looked ahead. "A warning." Corvin stopped. "What kind of warning?" Margaret's face became pale. "Your father left a message." Elowen's heart raced. "What did it say?" Margaret swallowed. "If they find this place, it means they already know about the betrayal." The lantern flame moved slightly. "And?" Margaret looked at Elowen. "He wrote one more thing." "What?" "Do not trust the person who comes looking for this." Nobody spoke, because suddenly the question became obvious. Who else knew about the tunnels? Who else knew they were coming? A sound echoed from deeper inside. A footstep. Everyone froze. Corvin lifted his rifle. "Show yourself." For several seconds there was only silence. Then a voice answered. "You always were too stubborn to die, Corvin." Elowen felt her blood run cold, because she recognized that voice. Her uncle. Thomas Voss stepped out of the darkness. Older than she remembered. Tired, but still carrying the same calm expression he always wore. The expression of a man who believed he could explain anything. Elowen stared at him. "You." Thomas looked at her. "I was hoping you would never find this place." The disappointment in his voice hurt more than anger, because it sounded almost like sadness. "You knew." Thomas looked away. "Yes. You knew my father was investigating Marlowe." Yes. You knew he was in danger. Yes. And you helped them. A long silence followed. Finally, Thomas whispered, yes. The word broke something inside her, not because she was surprised, because she had hoped she was wrong. Why? Thomas looked at her. You think it was about money, wasn't it? No. His voice cracked. It was about survival. Elowen stared. What does that mean? Thomas stepped closer. When your father discovered what Marlowe was doing, he wanted to expose everyone involved. And I knew what would happen. Thomas looked around the tunnel. They would destroy this valley. Elowen shook her head. So you helped them. I made a deal. With criminals. Yes. The honesty shocked her. Thomas looked broken. I thought I could control it. Corvin laughed bitterly. You always did think you were smarter than everyone. Thomas looked at him. And you always thought running away made you better. The words hit hard. Corvin's expression changed, because there was history between them. You knew, Corvin said. Thomas looked down. I knew you found him. Elowen looked between them. What are you talking about? Corvin went silent. Thomas answered. Your father wasn't killed. The world seemed to stop. Elowen could barely breathe. What? Thomas closed his eyes. He was captured. By who? Thomas looked toward the deeper tunnels. Marlowe. Elowen felt her hands go cold. He's alive. Thomas hesitated. Then, yes. 1,000 emotions hit her at once. Hope, anger, fear, relief. She had spent years mourning someone who might still be waiting. Where is he? Thomas looked deeper into the tunnel. He's not here. Then where? Before Thomas could answer, a voice came from behind them. A slow clap echoed through the darkness. Everyone turned. Victor Marlowe stepped out, surrounded by armed men. His expensive coat looked completely out of place underground, but his expression was calm, almost amused. I have to admit, Marlowe said, I underestimated you. His eyes moved toward Elowen. I thought the ranch would break you. Elowen stared at him. You destroyed my family. Marlowe smiled slightly. No. He shook his head. Your family destroyed itself. Corvin stepped forward. You don't get to rewrite what happened. Marlowe ignored him. You know what the problem with people like you is. He looked at Elowen. You believe hard work means you deserve something. Elowen's face hardened. And you believe money means you can take anything. Marlowe smiled. Now I understand why your father was so proud of you. Those words hurt. Because they reminded her of what she had lost, but they also gave her strength. You're afraid. Marlowe raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? You spent years trying to erase one man's evidence. She stepped forward. Because you know the truth can destroy you. For the first time, Marlowe's expression changed. Only slightly, but enough. Elowen saw it. Fear. Real fear. And she knew she was right. The fight was not about land. It was never about land. It was about what her father discovered. The truth. Marlowe raised his hand. The men around him moved. Corvin tightened his grip on his rifle. But before anything happened, another sound echoed through the tunnel. A voice. Weak, older, but familiar. Elowen. Her entire body froze. She knew that voice. She had heard it in dreams for years. She turned. From the darkness behind Marlowe, a man stepped forward. Older, exhausted, but alive. Her father, Elowen Voss. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Elowen whispered, Dad! And the man who had been missing for years looked at his daughter. His eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry it took so long. And after years of wondering, years of grief, and years of unanswered questions, Elowen finally ran toward him, because sometimes the strongest people are not the ones who never break. They are the ones who survive long enough to find what they thought they had lost forever. For several seconds, Elowen could not move. The entire world seemed to disappear. The men, the weapons, the danger surrounding them. All of it faded away. There was only one thing she could see. Her father. The man she had spent years missing. The man whose voice she had tried to remember on lonely nights. The man whose old coat she had held when the house felt too empty. He was standing in front of her. Alive. Older. Changed. But alive. Elowen. Her name sounded different coming from him. Not like a memory. Not like a dream. Like the father who used to wake her before sunrise and carry her onto the back of his horse so she could see the first light over the mountains. She wanted to run to him. She wanted to ask 1,000 questions. She wanted to scream at him for leaving. She wanted to forgive him. She wanted everything at once. But instead, she stood frozen. Because sometimes the heart needs time to believe what the eyes already know. Then finally she whispered, "Why?" Elias Voss looked down. And in that moment, Elowen saw something she had never expected. Regret. Not the regret of a man caught. The regret of a father who knew he had lost years he could never get back. "I tried to come home." His voice was older than she remembered. "I tried more times than you know." Elowen's eyes filled. "Then why didn't you?" Elias looked toward Victor Marlowe. "Because every time I got close, they moved you somewhere else." Elowen looked confused. "What?" Elias took a slow breath. "After I discovered what Marlowe was doing, I found out the land thefts were only part of it." The tunnel became silent. They weren't just stealing property. He looked at the old documents. They were changing identities. Corvin's expression hardened. "Changing identities?" Elias nodded. "Families disappeared because they were forced out. Then their land was transferred to fake owners. New names, new records, new histories." Elowen felt sick. "They erased people." "Yes." Elias looked at her. "And when I found proof, I became the next person they needed to erase." Victor Marlowe finally spoke. "You always did enjoy making yourself sound like a hero, Elias." Everyone turned. Marlowe stood with several armed men behind him, but his calm expression was gone. The confidence he carried into the tunnels had faded, because the one thing he feared was standing in front of him, the truth. "You could have walked away," Marlowe said. Elias looked at him. "No, you could have taken the money. No, you could have lived comfortably." Elias shook his head. "And let you destroy families?" A small smile appeared on Marlowe's face. "You really believed people cared?" The words echoed. "You thought telling the truth would save everyone." He stepped closer. "But people don't care about truth." Marlowe looked around. "They care about comfort." Elowen stared at him. "That is what you tell yourself." Marlowe looked at her. "What?" "That people are selfish." She stepped forward. "Because if you admit people can care, then you have to admit what you did was wrong." For the first time, Marlowe looked uncomfortable. Because Elowen had found the weakness in him. Not his money, not his power. His belief that everyone was as empty as he was. "You think you understand this world?" Marlowe asked. "No." Elowen looked at him calmly. "I understand people." She glanced toward Corvin. "I know some people run when they are hurt." Then toward Margaret. "I know some people stay silent because they are afraid." Then toward her father. "And I know some people make mistakes, but still choose to do the right thing." Her eyes returned to Marlowe. "But you," she shook her head, "you chose this." The silence that followed was heavy. Because everyone there knew she was right. Marlowe's anger finally broke through. "Enough!" He raised his hand. The men behind him moved. Corvin lifted his rifle. But before anyone could fire, Thomas Voss stepped forward. Everyone stopped. Elowen looked at him. Her uncle, the man whose betrayal had shattered her. "What are you doing?" Thomas looked at her. For the first time, he did not look confident. He looked tired. "I'm ending this." Marlowe laughed. "You?" Thomas ignored him. "I spent years telling myself I was protecting this family." His voice shook. "But the truth is, I was protecting myself." Elowen said nothing. "I was angry at your father." Elias looked at him. Thomas continued. "You always believed doing the right thing mattered more than winning." He looked around the tunnel. "And I hated that." "Why?" Thomas looked at Elowen. "Because I thought the world only rewarded people who took." A tear moved down his face. "I was wrong." Nobody spoke. "I helped them because I thought I could control them." He looked at Marlowe. "I was just another person you used." Marlowe's expression became cold. "You pathetic fool." Thomas smiled sadly. Maybe. He stepped between them. But at least I finally know it. Everything happened quickly after that. The men hired by Marlowe hesitated. They had expected fear. They had expected surrender. They had not expected the people they controlled to finally stop obeying. Corvin moved first. The fight that followed was chaos. The tunnels filled with shouting and movement. But this time, Elowen was not hiding. She was not waiting for someone else to save her. She moved with purpose. She grabbed the evidence box Elias had hidden and protected it. The same hands people had mocked for years were now holding the proof that could bring down the most powerful men in the valley. Marlowe saw it, and he panicked. He rushed toward her. "You have no idea what you're holding." Elowen stepped back. "I know exactly what I'm holding." She looked at the papers. My family's truth. Marlowe reached for them, but Corvin stepped between them. "You're finished." Marlowe laughed. "You think this changes anything?" His eyes moved around the tunnel. "People forget." Elowen shook her head. "No." She held the documents tightly. "They do." She looked directly at him, but not when someone makes sure they remember. The final battle inside the tunnels lasted only minutes, but the consequences lasted for years. When the authorities arrived in Hollow Creek, they found more than stolen documents. They found records, names, payments, proof of corruption stretching across decades. Victor Marlowe's empire collapsed almost overnight. The men who worked for him turned against him when they realized there was no money left to protect them. The officials who accepted bribes were removed. The false land records were destroyed. Families who had been forced away finally had their names restored. And the Voss Ranch? It remained standing. Not because a powerful company allowed it, because one woman refused to let it be taken. Months later, spring returned to the valley. The mountains that once felt cold and unforgiving became green again. Flowers appeared along the old trails. The river moved freely, and for the first time in many years, Hollow Creek felt different. People still talked. Small towns always did. But the conversations changed. They no longer whispered about Elowen Voss as the woman who was too much, too quiet, too different. They spoke about her as the woman who stood when everyone else looked away. The woman who uncovered the truth. The woman who saved the valley. But Elowen never cared about becoming a legend. She only wanted a home. One evening, she stood outside the ranch house watching the sunset over the mountains. Corvin walked beside her. For a while, neither spoke. They had both learned that silence did not always mean loneliness. Sometimes silence meant peace. "You know," Corvin said, "when I first saw you coming up that mountain, I thought you were crazy." Elowen smiled. "I was." "No." He looked at her. "You were brave." She looked away. "People spent a long time telling me I wasn't." Corvin nodded. "I know." A pause. They were wrong. The simple words meant more than any grand speech, because they came from someone who had seen her fight, someone who knew the truth. Elowen looked toward the ranch. "My father always said, 'Land remembers.'" Corvin smiled slightly. "What does that mean?" She looked at the mountains. "It means people leave pieces of themselves behind." She took a breath. The work, the love, the sacrifices. Her eyes softened. "And even when someone tries to erase them," she looked at him, "they remain." Corvin reached for her hand. A small gesture, a quiet promise, the kind that did not need a crowd watching. Years later, people would tell stories about Hollow Creek. They would talk about the hidden tunnels, the stolen land, the powerful men who fell. But the story people remembered most was not about money. It was about a woman everyone underestimated. A woman they believed was too weak, too ordinary, too easy to ignore, until the day she proved that strength was never about being the loudest person in the room. Strength was standing back up when the world expects you to stay down. Strength was choosing truth when lies were easier. Strength was having a heart that remained kind even after people tried to break it. Elowen Voss never became powerful because she changed who she was. She became powerful because she finally understood who she had always been. And in the quiet mountains of Hollow Creek, where the wind carried old memories through the valleys, one lesson remained forever. A person's worth is never measured by what others see on the outside. It is measured by the courage they carry when everything is taken away. And sometimes, the person everyone ignores is the person who saves them all.